Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective is upon us as we start to get in the latter part of January. Unbelievable. We are almost a month gone in the year. It doesn't feel like we've really even started the year, but almost a month is gone now. Hope everybody's doing well. Still very, very cold here in the United States. Kind of a unusual cold snap in the southern part of the United States. It's weird because our friends up in the northern part of the United States are already just talking about like maybe getting a first snow of the year. I've already shoveled about 2 feet of snow down here in North Carolina. So things have been a little bit unusual this year. Hopefully that doesn't continue. We enjoy the warmer weather where we are. But anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's starting to get into 2025. I have to get used to saying those things as well. But hope everybody's doing well. I've been going through this kind of mental exercise in terms of thinking about as we, kind of transition from cloud being the primary focus for a lot of people and for a lot of CIOs and CTOs and product managers and things to AI becoming more and more a day-to-day thought process, a day-to-day thing to be thinking about. And I got to thinking about, if I went back a decade or so ago and we heard a number of CIOs talk about, their company was going to be cloud first. They had a cloud first strategy. And, you could look at that and you would go, okay, I can see what you're trying to do. I can see why you're sort of saying, look, we have a transition into a new sort of era of technology, new opportunities with this new technology. Let's put those front and center of the way we think about things. Don't necessarily think about necessarily dragging old processes forward. That was the thing that oftentimes led people to start using the cloud. And it got me thinking, if I was a CIO and I decided, and I woke up this morning on January 19th, 2025, and I said, hey, we are going to take an AI-first approach to, where we are going forward, to our sort of technology strategy. What might that look like? And the reason I've been thinking about it is I get a chance in my sort of day job to talk to a lot of CIOs, a lot of folks who are kind of responsible for enterprise strategies and so forth. And what I've learned so far is that there isn't really sort of a direct path that anybody has laid out. There isn't a very clear AI strategy that people have in mind, right? So when we did sort of cloud strategy, you had a lot of folks who said we are going to, their in essence, their cloud strategy was anything new is going to be up in the cloud first and foremost. So any new project that comes along, we're going to address it and try and adapt it to the public cloud as much as possible. And then in order to sort of showcase that was happening quickly, because we don't necessarily, as any given business, necessarily create a lot of brand new applications in any given year, right? It's less than 20% of anything is typically going to be new, and a lot of it tends to be, sort of maintaining the existing stuff. A lot of times they would go, okay, anything new is going to be sort of cloud first, and then what they did to sort of augment that was there was a lot of lift and shift. There was a lot of, hey, let's just pick up VMs that are running in our data center and sort of essentially move them without making any changes into the cloud. And so this is where you would get a lot of CIOs who, had claimed to have a cloud-first strategy, were oftentimes sort of counting numbers of how many VMs they had moved. But anyways, that's sort of beyond the point. It's sort of beyond this exercise that I've been doing. But what I find is, as I talk to a lot of CIOs, the conversation sort of begins from a fragmentation perspective, right? In essence, when you sort of say, hey, where are you from an AI perspective, they'll sort of start to walk through a menu or a list of kind of where they are. And what I find it oftentimes is it's kind of broken up into pieces like this. And not every company is the same, but a lot of them fall into these types of buckets and categories. The first one is they will typically have an existing data science team. And this is, larger organizations. In some cases, maybe they don't, they just have a data team, but they have a data and a data science team who, for the last number of years have really mostly been building like predictive AI or machine learning types of things. So recommendation engines, computer vision, those types of, predictive analytics types of things. And so they have that in place, but because the cost of building those models are very, very expensive, the people to do that are very expensive. those folks are sort of kept to very specific types of projects, right? They're not necessarily showcased to the whole business as a sort of centralized service. We can help you with anything. They tend to be focused on very important things. So, for example, if you are a bank or a mortgage company, they're focused on the application that's going to help determine whether somebody is eligible for a mortgage, right? One of the things that you're trying to crank through a lot of volume, you want to sort of weed out the ones that don't make sense. You want to start to put into categories the ones that are going to be very profitable, are going to be high risk, are going to be medium risk, low risk, those types of things, right? And maybe it's for a manufacturing company and you're using the predictive models to look at the manufacturing line. You're looking for defects. You're looking for things that you can kind of predict based on, computer vision or whatever the statistical models might be of where you're going to have defects, where you're going to have problems, when you may have to shut down the line, things that are going to be very, very expensive if you get them wrong, but can be, highly valuable if you can prevent them from business, right? And so we've heard, lots of stories like this, preventative maintenance for airplanes, all sorts of things like that. But most of these sort of larger companies will have had those teams in place. They may have called what they were doing AI or not, but they're not necessarily, kind of doing the everything, everything gets AI that we're starting to talk about these days, right? The second thing that you'll find is that they typically are beginning to start to have sort of a, center of excellence, an AI center of excellence, in the same way that they had like a cloud native center of excellence or a cloud center of excellence, right? Where they would pull out certain very smart people in the organization, people that wanted to effect change, people that were willing to work on new technologies, and they would sort of try and stay ahead of the learning curve. Sometimes take on some of these new projects, evaluate a lot of new technology, whether those were open source technologies or vendor technologies. And they were trying to get ahead of things. And the struggle with some of these centers of excellence is oftentimes those people don't necessarily want to go back into the day-to-day of the business, right? So if they come up with some interesting idea, they're happy to hand it off to a line of business or something like that, but they don't necessarily want to go live with it day to day. And so you would run into issues where the center of excellence was great for coming up with ideas, but they weren't necessarily great at executing or living with those ideas long term. But anyways, we're beginning to see again those centers of excellence kind of concept coming along for people that are saying, look, we're getting bombarded with opportunities with AI. We need some group to kind of be out in front of that, and that's a can be a useful thing. The next thing we often see is various lines of business, various groups kind of going off and doing their own experimentation, whether they are experimenting with some plugins that are now being offered with some of the most common tools that they use. So maybe they're leveraging the Microsoft suite or a Google suite or a Salesforce suite or something along those lines, a Figma or a Canva or something like that, where you can just kind of plug in AI into your tools. And so we're going to see some of that. We see companies who are working with certain consulting groups or sort of industry-specific groups. So maybe you're working in insurance or you're working in healthcare or maybe the building industry, the construction industry. And so there's lots of kind of industry vertical specific, job specific, in some case sort of niche specific kind of little LLM type of models that are being built. And so we're seeing people experiment with some of that stuff. And then oftentimes as you talk to the sort of core IT group, they are a little bit in the dark and they're a little bit kind of playing whack-a-mole in terms of saying, hey, what are people trying to do? What do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to be building? Just in somewhat the same way that they were doing with cloud, where they were going, I need to keep up with the latest technology because I know people are going to ask me for stuff, but I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be. And I don't necessarily know how to fit that into the IT procurement model and operational model and all that stuff. So, we're very much seeing kind of fragmentation. We've talked about it on the show quite a bit. Like we're seeing certain use cases that are, becoming more fruitful than others. But for the most part, what I see is I talk to, different groups and CIOs and people that are, kind of have some level of visibility to this in their company. It doesn't yet feel like they go, I really kind of have my arms around things. It's more a matter of like, I'm trying to understand what everybody's trying to experiment with. And I'm trying to understand where we should best utilize our resources, whether those are dollars spent, whether those are, engagements with vendors or consultants, or whether those are things that they should just be sort of experimenting with on their own. And so I find a lot of that. So I got to thinking about it, and I was like, okay, if I had the role of being sort of the board of CEO, or somebody said, look, I want you to take sort of an AI first approach to this. I want to see how far we can push the limits of leveraging AI within our company. And I really want you to sort of take that, bull by the horns and go run with it. What would I go about doing? And to a certain extent, as I was sort of making my list or my approach to it, I did find myself kind of recognizing why so many of these CIOs feel sort of scattered, because the things that you have to think about are technology oriented, economics oriented, obviously sort of psychology oriented of, what are we trying to do? You really have to understand the business. And I don't mean just like, hey, we're in the pharmaceutical business, we're in the automotive business, but you have to understand kind of all the tasks within the business and start to ask yourself, okay, where could this technology be applied to help, improve what we could do? And so I sort of came up with a list, and I hate that sometimes as I do some of these weekend perspectives, the output always turns out to be sort of a list, but it helps me sort of work through certain aspects of the decision-making process or the scope of what we're trying to do. So I think the first thing as I was thinking about this, and these aren't in any specific order, but they're kind of, various kinds of thoughts that came to mind as I was thinking about how I might do this. So the first thing that I thought about was, I think, and again, a lot of things you're going to do in parallel. There's not necessarily a first one to do, but you're going to try and do a bunch of these in parallel so that you can start to have enough information, enough of a picture of where you can kind of go attack things, where the possibilities are, where things are multiple years down the road. So the first couple of things that I thought about were, I would want to really start to sit down with the lines of business, and where they use technology, what technology does to drive an experience for them, whether it's an internal experience to the business or an external experience for their customers or external experience for like partners and so forth. Really start to understand the business at a use case level, at a process level, and begin to sort of brainstorm with them of, okay, what do you think AI could possibly do to help with this, right? And so you're doing a little bit of getting a sense of, digging into the business a little more than you had been doing, looking at where you have touch points that could be augmented potentially or replacing, and then putting a little bit of an onus on those owners to think about their business, their task, their focus, because they're going to understand it way better than you do. They live with it 24 hours a day. They live with it 365 days a week. You understand it at a high level. But that would be one of the first things I would do is to get a sense from the people that are interacting with the technology you provide. Where do they start to see possibilities, right? And again, they don't necessarily have to understand the technology. They don't have to understand stuff like models and training and all that stuff. But just, where could you use an assistant? Where could you use something that would bring expertise to areas in which maybe you don't necessarily afford expertise, or whatever those things might be. The second thing I think I would start to do as I had that in place is I would start to break things down into sort of 3-month, 6-month, and 12 months categories. And this could be thought of as like low-hanging fruit and other types of things. But I think what I'd be looking at is, what are the things that we know we could put in place within, say, 3 months? And again, these are probably going to be the things in which you go, there's already a tool that natively does that for us. There's a plugin to the services that we already use today. There's people that are already doing this that I can kind of pull for them. And you're probably also starting to think to yourself, like, I don't have to differentiate the business on every one of these things. Some of these might just be, I'd like to speed up the volume that we can process on a given day, or the accuracy doesn't need to be 100% all the time. It can be in the 95 to 98% accuracy rating, because the people are really just kind of trying to get basic general directional type of things, right? So I would do that, and then the other part of the sort of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months thing, or 6 month, 12-month thing is it gives you a sense of how long do you think you need to experiment with this before you think you're going to feel comfortable getting to some sort of decision, right? Like, we're going to bring AI to this thing, or we're going to, it's not really ready yet. Let's sort of push it down the road. and it helps you kind of scope out, okay, how much time do I give to this? How much leeway do I give to it? Because certain things are, as fast as we've seen AI evolving, things are going to get better in the next couple of months or the next couple of months after that. So I think it can be a useful framing for saying, based on some research we've done, based on what we're hearing from the marketplace, based on talking to a lot of people, these are things that are tangible. Because the other part of it is you're going to start seeing a lot of, as you start to lay out a strategy, you start to lay out a roadmap, you're going to get people that are become very anxious, right? Because AI is now a technology that, unlike a lot of things that we've done in the past, that people can go touch and feel, or at least they think they have the ability to kind of go interact with it, right? It's as much show as it is tell. And so you're going to get people who go, well, I played around with a ChatGPT, or I played around with a llama, or I played around with whatever it was. Why can't I have that for my business, right? Or why is it taking you so long to do this thing? Isn't it just a chatbot or something? So, you want to be able to kind of manage expectations of the business, because again, if the AI thing plays out anything like the cloud thing, you're going to see people that expect results fairly quickly, or you're going to start fighting the battle of a lot of sort of shadow AI, right? So those are the first couple of things that I had in mind. The third thing that I had in mind, and again, this kind of feels like it goes contrary to my, center of excellence sometimes are struggles, but I think I would want to set up a sort of center of, and instead of sort of center of excellence, I'd want to sort of set up a center of what I'm going to call sharing expertise or sharing experiences. Because I think what we're going to find within organizations is the ability to understand the learning curve that comes with doing things with AI. And you can see this where, maybe you're following people on one of the social media apps, or, you're attending events or whatever, and you will talk to people who are like, oh, we're making big breakthroughs. We're doing amazing things with prompt engineering, or we're beginning to play around some agentic stuff and so forth. And what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have like one group kind of collect all of the centralized knowledge for it and then not share those things, right? So that everybody in the organization has kind of their own learning curve. You want to figure out early on, how do we start to centrally collect what people are doing? How do we centrally communicate out to groups? And again, it doesn't have to be completely centralized. It could be just, peer-to-peer sharing and so forth. But you do want to sort of actively think about what would be the communication mechanism you would have in order to facilitate that sharing of experiences, both good and bad. Try and lessen the learning curves so that they happen faster, or they're not happening all in parallel and nobody's learning from each other. So that was sort of the second thing or third thing I had in mind. And then beyond that, I think you start to get into a bunch of questions that sort of are a mix of technology and business logic and kind of rationalization and so forth. So, I think I'll kind of walk through the list of this. So one of the things I had on my list was, when do we just use base models, right? So whether I'm pulling a base model from, something I can buy off the shelf, I can get from somewhere, something I could pull from Hugging Face and open source, and just use what's available versus and determine how useful that is versus, when do I have to start training a model or fine tuning a model or any of the alignment sort of techniques in which I'm trying to bring either my business knowledge, maybe it's, as we spoke with Cote this past week about like his style of writing, like when can you just use the base versus when do you have to go through the processes of trying to train that, right? And I think that's an interesting thing that you want to not necessarily make a black or white, binary rule about, but it's something that you do want to put as part of your communication mechanism, your sort of sharing experience. The other next conversation I sort of think that's really important is to determine, as you're evaluating whether these projects are successful or not, or whether you should go after them, do you have a distinct viewpoint of, are we initially trying to just augment things that we do? Are we trying to augment services we have? Are we trying to augment the people we have? Or, are we doing this with a very distinct direction of trying to replace human interaction, right? And people are going to have different opinions on that, whether that makes sense or not for the business. But I think it's a distinct conversation you want to have as to, it's going to impact what the results of the thing are going to look like. It's going to impact kind of the cost of the system. It's going to impact how tolerant you're going to be of errors of the system. So I think that sort of, are we trying to augment things versus are we trying to replace things? And again, there's going to be a right and a wrong and a place and a time for each of those things, and some blending of between them, to where you really want to sort of set that expectation somewhat early. And obviously you're going to learn over time, but I think that's an important thing to be looking at. Another thing I had in mind, then I think this is going to be even more important for AI than maybe even it was for the early days of cloud. In the early days of cloud, the expectation was cloud's cheaper. It continually gets cheaper. AWS liked to tell us every chance they got that, your legacy IT group is old and slow, and people kind of, piled onto that. And then over time, it was like, wait a second, my cloud bill is expensive. My cloud bill is complicated. Why is my cloud bill going up? And there might be good reasons for that. There might be unknown reasons for that. There might be erroneous reasons for that. But we really never put sort of financial systems around it, at least early on. And so, we kind of evolved into a place where, we had to have distinct people who were helping you figure out your bill. We had a lot of people who were like, as we saw during the pandemic, realized that they were spending a lot using the defaults of the cloud. Maybe they were saving 5 copies of their data, or didn't really understand how replication worked. I think in the AI space, since we're dealing with GPUs, which much higher cost of compute, much more difficult to get. We're dealing with data scientists that are very expensive human resource. I think having that sort of cost monitoring and modeling in place earlier, and starting to really kind of understanding what that all looks like. Because I think if you ask somebody just off the top of their head, like, hey, let's take an important application in your business and we're going to apply AI to it, what percentage increase do you think that's going to be? How much value do you think you're going to get? I think the economics around it are still kind of very unknown for a lot of people, a lot of companies. And I think you want to start putting some systems in place so at least you have visibility over it, whether or not you truly understand what's good cost versus exorbitant costs versus, experimentation costs and all that stuff. I think, you're going to learn over time. But I think knowing what we learned from the cloud experience, you're going to kind of want to put that in place from an AI perspective. Now, the next thing I think that you got to think about is, who am I working with, right? I mentioned sort of the fragmentation that I see in talking to a lot of companies. What that means is they're doing a combination of a lot of things. In some cases, they're talking to large companies, the cloud providers, the larger, IT companies that we all sort of know. But in some cases, they're going to be, interacting with, smaller startup companies who come along and say, hey, we have this silver bullet, right? Or we build this thing that's specific for your industry. And I think it'll be important to sort of watch how that plays out, because as we've been seeing with a lot of early companies in the AI space, and again, it depends on where they are. I don't want to make a broad statement, but like we've seen a lot of those companies who start off, they're doing something interesting and they just can't make a business model out of what they do. Because again, the cost of doing AI technology seems to be, at least at this point, much more expensive than what we were used to with sort of the cloud and CPU-based compute and open source software and all those sort of things. So, I think we're going to see some ebbs and flows from the sort of AI ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, and so forth, whether or not they're making money, and that should be something that you're taking in mind in terms of how much do I want to build upon something that I don't know whether that company is going to be around very long, and how adaptable can we be if their technology isn't there, right? So those are all in place. I do think, most of the companies I talk to are still figuring out what their security policies look like, their usage policies look like, and those are still all over the board. Everything from, well, we're not too worried about it right now. We just want to see if we can find success, and then we'll figure out security later, right? I've seen that with a lot of lines of business who just want to get out there and solve a problem, and they think certain tools can solve a problem for them. In some cases, they can. They're perfectly fine the way they are. The thing that they're building is entirely public facing. Where you tend to run into problems is anytime you are bringing your own company data to that domain, to that application, to that service, and then figuring out, like, how do I get the data in? Is that data going to be shared with people? How vulnerable am I to the system accidentally sharing information with users? How vulnerable are we to hallucinations or bad information? And that's where I think I'm seeing a lot of people are kind of confused about, is an LLM, what is an LLM? Is it just like a database? Can I just go in and take out rows and tables? How hard is it to get information into the system? More importantly, how easy is it to get information out of the system? Oops, we put the wrong data in there. Somebody bypassed a rule we have or a safeguard we have. How do we get that data out? But at the same time, also, being able to do things like, okay, how do we do sort of the SSO, IAM, authentication, authorization stuff that we talked about a couple weeks ago on these LLM models, right? And I think that's an area that's still evolving quite a bit. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch how strict or loose or, gray area in between that companies are about their internal security policy. How much do we allow people to use the technology, to experiment with it versus, what is our policy going to be for things that are being built externally, sort of external facing applications and services and data sharing and all that kind of stuff. So I think all those things kind of have to be taken into consideration. So those are a bunch of the things I had on my list. I think another one that I had on my list, I think it'll be very interesting to see, and this isn't really at all unique to AI, but it's kind of an evolving thing. Will we see people doing, things with sort of vendored software or SaaS or cloud type software, and then, kind of looking either for open source alternatives or doing experiments with open source in parallel? I think we'll probably see a lot of that in parallel. So for example, a great example is going to be like coding assistants, like a GitHub Copilot or something like that. I think we're going to see people that are going to say, oh, that's, functionally useful. But at the same time, what we're seeing from the vendors like a Google or a Microsoft is they're already beginning to bundle that type of service, an AI service, in with their other end user services. And like we just saw this last week, and I'll put some links in the show note. They're raising the price on some of these bundles, and they're going, oh, but the AI is now included for free. And it's like, well, no. You're now making every single person pay some sort of AI tax to get the service, but they may not be using the service. And you may say to yourself, well, I really only have like 20 or 30 users that really need that level of service. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to sort of watch as people begin to be more savvy about what the pricing models look like, who's using it, who's getting value out of it, versus where the cost of these things go from. And then do they look at alternatives? Because there are alternatives for coding assistants, for chatbots, for all sorts of stuff, using like open source types of things, right? Which may not cost you nothing, because again, you still have to run them yourself and run GPUs and all that kind of stuff. But you may have much more flexibility of who has access to that. Are you allocating this for 100 developers or 10,000 developers and all that sort of stuff? So that was another one I had on my list. I think I covered most of the things. I put the list in the show notes of some things I was thinking about. But I think it'll be very interesting to sort of see as people evolve with this, especially in the enterprise, especially as they get into these mixed use cases of internal usage as well as external services they're providing, or working with third parties that deliver AI services. How do they go about sort of rationalizing? Do they have a big picture of things? Are they dealing with a lot of fragmentation within their own organizations? Are they dealing with, this line of business or this division of our company has these policies and these have these policies? How are the two going to rationalize themselves? Are they in conflict with each other? I think, this is going to be a year in which we will see a lot more discussion about, how companies are trying to paint a broader set of brushstrokes about what their AI strategy looks like. I think we're going to hear a lot more about how they're thinking about both the capabilities as well as the cost. And I think for myself, kind of going through this mental exercise, I do realize there are a lot of elements to think through. And I think it's worth thinking through those things. And I'm sure there are, a half dozen or a dozen more things that I just, completely didn't think about in this, data, data sovereignty and data, kind of data cleansing and ETL types of things, and all the things around data, obviously really important. I would love to hear your feedback on, how is your company thinking about this in general? What are the big steps that you're taking? What are some of the small steps you're taking? Where's your organization allowing you to have autonomy? Where are you having to sort of follow corporate policies and so forth? But hit us up, show@thecloudcast.net. We'd love to hear your feedback. or hit us up at any of the social media channels. All that's at the bottom of the show notes of every one of our shows. If you look under feedback, you can reach us in a whole bunch of different ways. So love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about with this stuff. I think it's kind of a fascinating area of opportunity, also a complex area in terms of, trying to deliver great, interesting services and not do it in ways that are going to be, exorbitantly expensive, kind of break your ROI models, but also, keep your company safe and provide services that are valuable and don't get you sued and other things like that. So anyways, that'll wrap it up. Another weekend perspective. Thank you all for the time for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Excited to have you back with you in 2025. If you get a chance, give us a rating wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love to get some 5-star ratings or even the feedback, what you think about the show. Or again, hit us up at show@thecloudcast.net, email and stuff like that. We'd love to hear your feedback. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Hope you're having a good start of the year, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.